I'm here to tell you my own story.
When the sirens go,
for some time I had everything I dreamed of.
I have 7 brothers.
in 4.5 months, 4,000 bombs were dropped on my city.
2 died in the bomb. 2 were kidnapped. 3 escaped.
Have any choice other than fleeing Iraq.
Every day, every night, our gunshots.
My mom always used to say, if we go together as a family.
Mom told me that we were going to America, that we got our visas.
You look just like my mother.
And she says, honey, I need you to sue the President of the United States.
I had a burning desire
24 years later, I'm relocated in Lowell.
to a great country called the United States of America.
Chasing my dreams as a nurse, helping my children with their homework, driving, and I'm happy. Thank you.
It's November 1967. I'm almost 6 years old, living in Juanelo, Cuba, a barrio on the outskirts of Havana. It's a working class barrio. I have 4 generations of both sides of my family living all around me. In the barrio, nobody closes her windows or doors. Everybody knows everybody's business. Some people even work together. My father and my uncles work at a canning factory down by the river. My mother and my aunt teach at a school around the corner. And while the adults are working, the abuelas, the grandmothers, watch over us from their porches and their rocking chairs, and they don't miss a thing. Even if you start to think of something bad, they show up. But something weird is happening in the barrio, and I don't know what it is, how to explain it. Every now and then, it seems to me, a family disappears overnight. I'll go in the morning and walk by a friend's house and they're gone. There's nobody in the house. The house is locked up tight. There's a banner across the door that seems to seal it shut. When I ask the adults what's going on, they say things like, they flew away to Florida. But I don't know what Florida is. How could someone fly away anyway? I don't understand any of it. So I just keep asking questions, but nobody ever answers kids really thoroughly. So I didn't understand any of that. But I did know that somehow the sound of a motorcycle coming into the neighborhood, into the barrio, was linked to those disappearances. So I knew that when I heard that, there would be something going down the next day. What I didn't know was that my parents had actually applied for permission to leave the country, and that they'd been waiting for 3 years without knowing if or when the permiso would come. The permiso is what we called the exit papers. Parents had supported the revolution during the 50s, but when Castro's government took control, instead of the restored democracy that they'd been promised, they got ration books, repression. They saw lots of good people thrown in jail for criticizing the government, and they saw executions on live TV. So they had to get out of Cuba. They had to get their young family out of Cuba. But to do that now, you had to apply for permission from the new government, because for the first time, Cubans were no longer free to leave their country. They had to ask permission from the government. So my parents did that, and they immediately lost their jobs. And they knew that if and when that permiso came, they would have to leave behind everything that they owned. But they didn't own that much, so it wasn't a huge deal. And what did bother them, what scared them, was the notion of never seeing their family and lifelong neighborhood friends again. But I didn't know any of that. I was just a clueless 6-year-old running around, playing in my abuela Cuca's yard, my grandmother Cuca, who lived down the street from us. Every day I went there after school, and I would, she had these skinny hens that I liked to chase, and I tormented those poor creatures. One day I was there around dinner time, and I heard the motorcycle coming into the barrio, and I was so nosy, I had to figure out what was happening. So I ran through the gate, down the street and around the corner, and I saw in front of my house a huge mob of people. And near the sidewalk was the motorcycle, huge motorcycle. Inside, my father was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. The table was set for dinner, a dinner we never had. My father was answering questions that a guard in uniform was asking him, but my father never looked up. He kept answering, but never looked up. Behind the guard was my mother running around, packing the one suitcase we would be allowed to take with us. We each, I think, got a change of clothes and an extra pair of shoes. Next to the guard was my grandmother, Fina, the grandmother who lived with us. And she was holding my baby brother in a death grip, shaking and crying. I ran to her, and then all three of us were shaking and crying. And that's when the guard noticed me, and he called me over. Niña, ven acá. Little girl, come here. I went, and he said, is it true that you want to leave your neighborhood and your school and your friends and never see them again? And before I could answer, my grandmother and father and mother all yelled, sí, ella quiere. In no time, we were out on the street, and I remember the guard locking the door and sealing it shut with a banner, the same banner that I had seen on all those other houses. And years later, I learned that the banner read "Property of the Revolution." He gave my father papers and said, be at the airstrip tomorrow night at 8 p.m. That night, we slept at my uncle's house right above us. And everyone came to say goodbye during the night and in the morning too, during the next day. My great-grandfather was there, lots of relatives, and my first grade teacher showed up. I loved her, but I didn't know what to do with her in that setting. I was embarrassed, afraid, I don't know what it was. I ran and hid in a bedroom. My mother found me and said, Anita, your teacher was very, very brave to come here to the house of a Gusano family. Gusano means worm, and that's what the government called people like us who were trying to leave the country, worms. So mommy said, your teacher was very brave. She made herself brave. Ponte guapa, make yourself brave, like your teacher made herself brave, and go and say goodbye. I stood in front of my teacher, couldn't look at her face, stared at her shoes, finally looked up, and tears were just running down her cheeks. And every bit of emotion and fear and confusion that I had just exploded in sobs out of me. And the release of it felt like I was lifting off the ground and floating through the air. The next night, we showed up at the airstrip. There were 200 other gusanos and gusanitos there for the processing of leaving the next day. And like the other gusanitos, we were having a blast. We were all in our best clothes, but we were running around, rolling on the dirty floor, and we were filthy in no time. But then we got hungry, and there was nothing to eat, and we were thirsty, and there was nothing to drink. Sleepy, nowhere to sleep. We all kind of fell asleep on top of each other in little bunches. And I remember all that night, over the loudspeakers, these voices coming out and calling out names. The government was interrogating people, and all through the night, and threatening them with why they wouldn't be able to leave the next day with their family. That was the fear. They were just harassing them to the very end. But we did get out. The next morning we sat, I remember that plane and how excited I was. And I remember the attendant right before we took off walked down the aisle and sprayed us as she walked. I remember the spray in my face, and I think it was disinfectant. I don't know, but it must have felt like a slap to everyone on that plane. The next 2 days we spent in a refugee center on the outskirts of Miami. They gave us hats, boots, coats, put us on a plane, and we ended up somehow in Nashua, New Hampshire. But I was fascinated because there was snow everywhere, and the snowbanks went up over my head, and icicles that were just the coolest looking things hanging from roofs. And I had a new teacher to love. And at night, when the adults came back from their new jobs at a rubber boot factory down by the Nashua River, we all gathered around the TV and learned English by watching Gilligan's Island and Star Trek, but we couldn't say Star Trek. So we called it Los Orejones, the big-eared ones. That was our favorite show. But something wasn't right here either. There was a mystery here for me too. I would find my mother in her bedroom, lights out, crying. And she would say that it was a headache or a backache. I would run and get an aspirin and give it to her. And I knew though that the aspirin wasn't going to take away whatever it was, because I knew it wasn't a headache or a backache. Even kids could tell that that was a lie. And my grandmother never stopped crying from the moment she woke up until the moment she went to sleep. And we slept together like we had in Cuba. At night, I would put my arm around her and she would sob, and we would fall asleep like that. And I had my own problems, because for the first and the only time in my life, I was hearing voices, and I knew that only I could hear these voices. They came at night as I was trying to fall asleep, or if I woke up in the middle of the night. And I didn't want to tell anyone about it. I knew that it was a strange thing. The voices started soft and got louder, and they sounded metallic to me. And I couldn't understand what they were saying. And they just crashed in my head and got louder, and I would cover my ears, but I could still hear them. And I never told anyone that. I'm not one person. And I think that now, when I think about that time, I think I was trying to be brave. I think I was trying to make myself brave. The one thing that brought happiness to everyone was when we would get a letter from one of the old women in the barrio, and those women never forgot us, and the old women here never forgot them. The letters went back and forth for more than 50 years. And you know, their letters never had a lot of information. Sometimes someone had passed away. Sometimes a baby would be born, gossip, something funny that happened at the bus stop. But they were just the most beautiful connection to home. And for me, now that I have them, they're mine, and they are, when you touch them, they're as soft as a Kleenex. From all the times that people have opened the letters and folded them again. And I love to look at them, and when I read them, I hear an unwritten message in every line of every letter that I think those women were sending us. Ponte guapa, make yourself brave.
My name is Vojislav Đurđić. I was born in 1972 in Sarajevo. When I was 20 years old, the war in Bosnia escalated to the point of no return, creating death, destruction, and thousands of refugees, and I was one of them. After moving around from town to town, I finally settled in Bar, a small town in Montenegro where I met my wife Daniela, also a refugee from Bosnia. 5 years later, we were a married couple and our immigration visa to the United States was approved. Flight from Belgrade to Rome was my first time flying. I remember the plane was full of smoke. Half of the plane was designated as smoking section, and my seat was there. On our next flight from Rome to New York City, I was excited and I couldn't sleep. It didn't take me too long to figure out that the scotch was free. And by the time we arrived, I was relaxed and slightly drunk. It was late evening when we landed at Logan. When I stepped outside, the air smell of the ocean mist and the shuttle bus exhaust fumes. That is how freedom smells to me even today. With $1,300 in savings, my priority was to find a job as soon as possible and to learn English at the same time. About a week later, my case manager, Sasha, takes me to a job interview at 161 Devonshire Street. With the promise to improve my English, I was offered a job at the headquarters of the big real estate investment company. It was a minimum wage job with the formal dress code, suit and tie, but plenty of overtime available. My duties included sorting and delivering mail on 3 floors to over 200 employees, making fresh coffees twice a day at 6 kitchens, and my special overtime assignment, making backup copies of all corporate documents sent to a safe storage facility. It's hard to believe what kind of documents you can have in your hands as the lowest paid employee. From financial statements to performance reviews and everything in between. It was a privilege and the opportunity to understand how the corporate world is structured. Since smokers are easy to socialize with, I took every opportunity to join my coworkers to take cigarette breaks. It was not healthy, but it was a very effective way to practice my English. After 10 months, I was ready to apply for a position where my language skills will improve even more. My friend Faruk, also a refugee from Bosnia, referred me for a front desk position at the hotel in downtown. Soon after, I was making dinner reservations and recommending sites to visit, even though I only read about them in the hotel brochure. But life was getting better. Daniela worked at New England Medical Center. We bought our first car for $1,200, Ford Escort, blue. And we rented 1-bedroom apartment in Malden. In June of 2000, our son Jovan was born. Beautiful boy with big brown eyes, and he was the best thing that happened to us. When he was only 3 months old, one morning around 6 o'clock, he started to cry, and then he just stopped breathing. He was too small and started to turn blue. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I called 911. An ambulance took him to the hospital. Fear of losing a child was the worst fear I ever felt. Something was wrong with our son. Several episodes followed, and his condition had gotten worse. Next 6 months he spent in the intensive care. Numerous tests, several surgeries, tracheostomy tube, and a very low chance of getting better. Johan was ventilator dependent, and with progressing illness that is going to leave him completely paralyzed. He was transferred to Franciscan Children's Hospital. It was our home for the next year. Fragile and in need of round-the-clock care, his transition home took some time to figure out. Finally, we had a plan. I'll find a job as a live-in superintendent in the apartment building, and we can live where I work. A few months later, I'm at the interview for a live-in superintendent position at Mount Pleasant Apartments, an elderly housing community in Somerville. The first interview went well, but I never mentioned my son's illness. I was afraid to be disqualified. After the second interview, I was offered the job, and Mount Pleasant became our home for the next 3 years. Free apartment and $13 an hour were not a bad deal for someone in my position. But I wanted more for Jovan and Daniela. So I started to do construction work on the side, working most evenings and weekends. I worked all the time. We wanted to buy a house, and we slowly started to save for a down payment. In 2004, we bought our first home in Peabody. We got qualified for no income, no asset subprime loan. And with the help of predatory lender, our mortgage was approved. The house was in disrepair, then it looked horrible. Daniela wasn't sure whether to be happy or desperate about it. After 6 months of renovation, often working until midnight, we were ready to move in, and I was ready to leave my job at Mount Pleasant. It was extremely difficult to refinance the home and avoid losing it, but somehow we made it work. Same year, I founded Sigma Pros, a company that over the next 16 years renovated over 10,000 apartments from New York to Boston. We introduced high-speed occupied renovation and became a reliable partner to many large real estate companies. My goal to build a company where everyone can excel and feel proud of the work they do was becoming a reality. 6 months ago, COVID-19 started to spread globally at the alarming speed. And I had a feeling it's going to affect all of us in so many different ways. Our occupied renovation contracts were canceled. We had to send all of our employees home for the time being. And our business model didn't work anymore, and it needed to change. I still don't know what it is and what to do next. But I know I'm grateful for my wife Daniela, the strongest woman I know, my son Jovan, who taught me more about life than I can ever teach him, my team that stuck with me during these challenging times. And I know that overcoming our challenges makes us who we are, and this is just one of them. Thank you.
I'm standing at the first checkpoint on the way to visit my family farm for the first time since we left. Well, it's actually not the first time, because since the age of 13, we returned and left many times as the fight for land began in Zimbabwe. This land reform was aptly called the fast-track land reform because of the haphazard way that it was conducted and the violence and political motivations that were seen to be part of it. Unfortunately, it suspected that it wasn't for the poverty alleviation and righting the historical wrongs as had been portrayed to us in the media. But thus began our journey of leaving our home. My goal was to go back to the farm and see my gogo, Winnie. Gogo was a term we affectionately use for a nanny or housekeeper, but she was so much more than that to me. I had had many sleepless nights since arriving in Australia, thinking of all the many things I wish I'd said to her and explained, especially remembering back to that morning before we flew out in a house in Harare, this beautiful hug and lots of tears, as my teenage brain couldn't work out why we couldn't just take Winnie with us because she was part of the family. But obviously Australian immigration didn't see that. And since then I had thought of the many things I could have and would have said, things that only became apparent when arriving in Australia and having worked with refugees and understanding so much more, even understanding that we as a family could have applied for refugee status. But we were quite lucky in that fact that my mum was a nurse, and so we got accepted into Australia having the right skills and, in a sense, the right language. We were preferred candidates for the country. Yet so many people like Winnie got left behind to face continue to face the political and economic uncertainty. Many would say Zimbabweans are more economic or livelihood refugees. But it does pose the question that I was faced with, that there's a gap, that it doesn't, that the Refugee Convention is missing. As we began the journey down the old familiar farm roads, a sense of nostalgia filled me, returning to and from school, and but seeing the land now, it was so full of life and abundant, because there hadn't been the manicuring that the farmers would do on the sides of the roads. Even the roads were falling away, and it took us twice as long to get there. I was preparing myself for the view of our lovely farmhouse up on the hill, but nothing could have prepared me as I looked up and saw my old home in ruins from a fire that had swept through and burnt it, a lovely thatch house. That despair and floods of tears was replaced by the joy of seeing the jacaranda trees that my dad had planted up the driveway, a vision that he'd had when I was born of planting them so that they would create a beautiful avenue for the day that I got married. Now the jacarandas created a beautiful purple carpet all the way up the driveway. As we drove up and turned to the right to go towards the farmhouse so I could visit my grandparents' graves, which were in the garden, only to be greeted by a bunch of young men all holding farm implements, looking extremely angry. My chaperone decided to do a quick U-turn, and we headed towards the compound to find Winnie. Again, that sense of awe at how beautiful the land looked, all wild, and contrasted with my memory of what the farm had been like. As we came up to Winnie's house, I saw Michael, one of my dad's old farm workers, and he had a huge smile on his face as he recognized me instantly. But a sense of panic came into my heart as I looked and couldn't see Winnie in her familiar spot outside her kitchen hut. And I wondered if she died, if I was too late, if with all the political difficulties and the violence that was directed towards farm workers who worked for white farmers, this panic set in. But Michael jumped in the truck saying he would take us to Winnie. And it wasn't an ease of pain, it was actually more of a need to get to her as quickly as possible in case we were kicked off again in the interim and I just wouldn't get to see her and tell her the things that I had wanted to express of how much she'd meant to me and my family. So as we headed towards the field, Michael began to explain to us how they had had to be working in the field to pay rent in order to stay in their houses. Something that many Zimbabweans have been plagued with, of right and wrong, and who's the victims and the villains in our situation, where many of us have felt like we were political pawns in a very difficult game. As we arrived to the potato field, Michael shouted out for people to call Ambuya Winnie to come. And we were separated by a fence. And I was just taking in the familiar sights of the farm, and I looked up and saw Winnie shouting, "Amai Tasha, Amai Tasha," as she must have thought I was my mother. And I was looking for a way to get through the fence, really faced with the reminder that I wasn't the young farm girl I used to be. The barbed wire fence held me back, but also this feeling that I could be trespassing as this was no longer our land. As Winnie arrived, she climbed through nimbly for a 70-something lady, and we embraced in this beautiful hug that I remembered from that awful day when we left. And we were both just in floods of tears, crying And Winnie was just saying, thanks God, my Tasha, thanks God you're okay. You remembered me, thanks God. And I just couldn't believe that she was thanking God that I was okay, when I felt like we had been the ones who deserted her and left her in this food insecure and violent context. And I had this deep sense of understanding of how much she'd influenced my life, of who I was, and how my simple faith that had guided me through the first few years in Australia had really come through her. And as I stepped back and looked around, I saw all the other farm workers who gathered round, and not a dry eye around, everyone really impacted by this show of love and reunification. I will always remember that hug, although my friend did manage to get a beautiful photo of it that my brother then painted into a lifestyle painting, which we actually don't have the original anymore because he sold it in an exhibition. Another family was so moved by it and it likened to their experiences in a similar forced removal situation. In essence, the historical wrongs have been corrected through the land reform, but what it's left is a people, a lot of poverty and a lot of pain, as people have realized that the new and old farmers are not the enemy, but that we were used as political pawns. And now the aim is to try and reunify our country and rebuild in amongst a lot of political and economic uncertainty. But I'm so glad and grateful that now I get to visit Winnie regularly and maintain that connection to the land as she remains on the farm. And I go and collect her to take her to doctor's appointments. And when I do, I visit the new owners, and I'm slowly developing a relationship with them, with the hope that sometime soon they'll let me in to see my grandparents' graves, to pay respects for my parents who haven't yet had the courage to visit yet.
I grew up in Syria. We had very nice life and safe life. So first I remember we was living in small house. It was me and my sister. I think we was like 5 years old. It was small house, nice house. It just was one room. We was like living with my mom, my father and my mother in the same room. And when my mom had more kids, so we had to change the house, and rent bigger house. Actually, every 1 year we had to change the house, yeah, like rent another house. Finally, we rent big house. It was nice, and I made a lot of friends there in my new house. Like we had very nice neighbor. After my father saved some money from his job, finally we bought a house. We was very excited because after like 15 years of renting house, we bought like house for us. It was very exciting, and because my father a carpenter, so he did all the furniture for house, and he did all the house by his hand, and we was kids, but we was helping him. Even like because I like blue color, so he paint all my room blue, even all the house, all the kitchen blue. I was so exciting because like I get like the house on like the color I like. It was very exciting. When I like grew up, I was going to school and everything was normal in my country. Suddenly one day we was sitting watching the news. Just we saw in the news they talking about city. It's in Aleppo. Not in Aleppo, in Syria, but in different place. Like it's far from Aleppo. One kid wrote in the hall in the street, We don't want the president. We want freedom. The police, the next day, when the police saw that writing, they took the kids and they hurt the kids. For example, they cut the fingers. They hurt the kids very badly. We was very sad. I didn't imagine like, oh my God, he's just a kid, because I was like 13, 14 years old. I get scared even, like, if that happened to me or to one of my brothers, what we gonna do? The days went, and the police, like when the people in that city, people see how the police doing, how the police hurting the people, if they say like freedom, or if they don't want the president. So the people start protesting in that city. They don't want the president, they want the freedom. We was watching that in the TV, but we don't know what it's gonna going on, because it's scary, you know. And after, like, in Aleppo, it was normal, like it happened, it like take for a couple months, and I was going normal to school. My father was working. The first things happened in Aleppo. I went to school one day, and my school is far away from my home, so I was taking bus to went there. We was in the normal classroom. We was taking like the lesson. Suddenly we see the police came in the classroom, and they took the teacher because she was saying like something about the president. I was so scared. I just was like 14, and I didn't know what to do. Like, the whole school, it's full of police, and everyone like screaming, yelling. I didn't know what to do. I just sit down under the table, and I called my father. I told him, please come take me, because I don't know what to do. He come and took me home. Actually, that day, it was the last day, like, going to school. He come and took me home. From that day, everything start in my country. Like, protesting, the people start protesting in the street, and it was very scary. The school stopped and everything stopped. And actually, we just moved in my new house, and we had neighbors, like neighbors and friends. And actually, I want to say one story about my neighbor. She like get married when I was like that age, 14, and she had her baby, like first baby, and we was taking care of the baby all the time when she goes shopping and do stuff. And after that, because like the protesting happened in Syria, so in my country, the people like got two part love, like part wants the president, and part of the people doesn't want the president, and they start shooting each other. If one people see, oh, that guy didn't like he don't want the president, they kill them. We was scared. Actually, like one happened in my street, but we couldn't go anywhere, because where are we gonna go? Like, no choice, we had to stay at home. Actually, after a couple weeks, the bombs start in my country. The president side and the other side start bombing each other. And even the school get closed, but I had to do my last year of school, like to get to the college. So I just bought books and I was studying at home. Even like no school, but you can do it by yourself. Like I just bought the books and I was studying at home. So one day I was at home, I was studying. My brother was playing. Actually, I have three brothers and one sister. And my mom was cooking. Even we didn't have electricity at home, but I was studying at the gas light. And my father went outside to buy bread for us, like something to eat, because everything get closed and it was very hard to find even bread to eat. I was studying and suddenly I heard like very noisy sound, and I just look around. All my room it's full in the smoke. I don't know what happened. I was like, oh my god, what is going on? And all we ran to the kitchen to my mom. We hug her. What is going on? And everything it's break in my room, and I just heard people yelling. And because my house it was first floor, so everyone getting to my house, and just I heard my neighbor, she say, when I lost my son. And she just came. She was like, oh my god, all like blood. She say my son died. Really, I couldn't believe like what I'm gonna do, like what I'm thinking about. We was there, like, and we get scared, like afraid, like we couldn't breathe because the smoke. You couldn't believe, like it's all chemical. And so we just hugged my mom and we was like yelling, where my father, where my father. We didn't know if my father he's alive or no. My father was coming at home and he had like some vegetables, some bread. One of the people, they told him, your home come bomb. And he didn't believe how to get home. He threw everything in the floor. He just ran to the house. And when we saw him, I don't know what I felt like. I felt like I was crying, like I'm happy or I'm scared. I couldn't express my feeling because I saw my father, he's alive. Actually, we hugged him, and my father said, we cannot stay here, we have to leave. The last things I did, I just look around in my room. I didn't see any blue color. All the blue color, it's gone. You know, it's break and the smoke everywhere. We just get out from home. It was last day I saw my home. So we had to run, even like we cannot take like no cars outside, so we have to run in the street. And my father told us, okay, we're gonna run to my grandmother's house, even it's far, like 1 hour. He said, just run. And we was together, but my father say, if one of us die or one of us get shoot, don't look around, because if we went to help them, we're gonna die too. Actually, after 1 hour of running, thanks God, everyone was safe. We went to my grandmother's house. We was there for like couple months, but it get worse in that part too. So we all had to leave to the village. And like we just had a home in like in the city. We didn't have in the village. So we had to live with my grandmother's house. That house, it was just 3 rooms, 1 living room, and imagine 8 family. We was living together without electricity and without gas, without water. We had to go and take the water from far away and just for drink water. It was very hard time. Even when we have to sleep, like all the kids in one room and all the women in one room. If you want to go like drink water, you have to step to the kids to dump pass in like a person. Actually, after all that, I was studying. When I went, my books, it was with me. Even like I live with all that family, I was going outside like for walk, you know, the village. So I was walking and I take my books, I was studying. And no one believed, like really everyone like the war and everything, and I was studying. But I don't know, it was my dream to complete my studying. So actually I did the exam and I passed, but I couldn't register for the college because of the war. And if you want to register for college, you have to go to the like to Aleppo, and I was in the village. I couldn't go, so they didn't accept me in the university, even I have like very good grade. But when that happened, my father say, "Oh, I cannot live in Syria anymore." Because like no school, and my father lost his job, and we didn't have enough money to live. Everything, like we had war, but everything, it was expensive. Even you have to buy a water, even you have to buy a gas to cook. So we decided to go to Turkey. That was hard too when we went to Turkey, because we didn't have any passport, or we couldn't go with passport, so we have to go from Syria to Turkey by the border. And one day my father said, "Okay, we're gonna go. We cannot take anything with us, even clothes, even food, nothing." So we went there at 5 in the morning. We went in the border, but the man, he was with us, he say, "Oh, we have one way to go, but it's very hard." But we had to do it, you know? So that way, it was very hard because we walked 9 hours. Even the way, you have to know where to step, because if you step in like wrong way, you're gonna die, you know? So we went there. Before we walk, we just saw one man, he just stepped in the bomb and he died. Like, it's like 200 feet from us. Oh my God, we was so scary. But actually we did it after 9 hours. We went to Turkey, and it was different life. So we live in Turkey like 3 years, and after we applied to come, like to go out from Turkey, because we had just to work, no future there. So even we couldn't go to school because we didn't know the language, and like they didn't accept the Syrian kids in the school. So we decided to go outside. We apply for IUN, like international. So we apply to come like anywhere. Actually, when we get accepted, we didn't know where they gonna talk us. They say America. So at that moment, I get scared, and my mom too. But my father say, "Okay, we're gonna go." But actually we didn't want to come because, you know, the social media, how they talk about, oh, America, and because I'm actually a Muslim people, it was a hard decision. But actually we came here and we arrived here in 2016. At the beginning it was hard because we didn't speak any English. So my English was zero. So I had to learn English. Actually now I'm living in Lowell, Massachusetts. I have good life. I am studying, I'm in college. All my brothers now, they are in college. I'm driving. It's very excited because I couldn't do it in my country. And I living in a nice house, actually, because I did all my room blue here too, like blue blanket, even the wall I painted blue flowers. It was hard time, but I'm here, and thank you.